Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025. Time to start this whole thing all over again. And, wow. I don't know. Sort of late to the keyboard today. I was setting up before the show with Greg, who's already ready to go. And, we got some clips to line up. I have some other sound effects to line up. I keep forgetting. I want to try this one, that one, the other of the fanfares. We can get right to the news this way. But yeah, time to collect the stories of the day and attempt to make some sense of it before Trump takes off for the weekend. I assume that's coming earlier. He's on his way. He's going quite unbidden, I think, to Pope Francis's funeral in Rome, in Vatican City. And as it happens, well, one, that's a spectacularly bad idea because he's Donald Trump. And two, in my morning post where, looking for filler material to try and entertain each day. I mean, there's plenty of real news stories too, but, I've been playing that weird game of pick a random country for any given day and see if during that day Donald Trump threatens obliquely or explicitly to invade that country. And quite at random, Vatican City was the country of the day. And so I'm a little worried. I approach this day with some trepidation, let's say. All right. Well, at any rate, as I mentioned, Greg Dworkin and I were setting up before the show, and so things are quite ready. And I want to stretch this out. I got to figure out which fanfare I'm going to be using for. But I actually got this one. And I think Rosalind McGregor may have sent us this one. And Greg, this may put you at ease and offer you some comfort. Although I'm not sure how things sounded in the olden days on the other side of the phone. But here's the suggestion for today's fanfare. Familiar, right? So the old Skype ringtone that
that means I'm here.
Yeah,
that actually works.
That helps, right?
I love playing a Skype thing with Zoom.
Yeah,
because screw them.
That'll show you. Right. Well, we're still working our way through the weird interface here and the oddity of the disappearing chat, which I guess is sort of like Signal or what's the other one that
Mission
Snapchat?
Impossible. This tape will self-destruct in 30 seconds.
The original. I'm like, it's Snapchat, right? No, it's the self-destructing tape from the 1960s. All right.
That's what you should do. You should play the Mission Impossible theme song instead of that fanfare.
That's true. I'm pretty sure that they would. I don't know. I don't know if they sue you anymore, but they give you trouble.
Not for 30 seconds. Look, the Mission Impossible has self-destructed, so they're not around anymore.
Oh, they ain't. Yeah, so the case is moot at that point. All right, I got a number of other sounds
use the TV
available.
show, not the movie, and you
days.
should be okay.
Oh, yeah, right, that's true. Okay, well, that's an idea as well. But, yes, so in other words, here you are.
How you send doing? It along to your sound engineer. I'm doing fine. I got a couple of things here to talk about. I want to talk about Abrego Garcia, Democratic response to it, how the courts are responding to these, throw them out of the country cases. But I actually want to start with a clip on for something completely different. Okay. I want to start with a clip about 60 minutes.
All right. Yeah. So I did see this last night. The sign off. I wasn't watching the evening news. I saw people talking about it on social media.
This is CBS Evening News, which I don't watch, which nobody watches, which is one of the reasons why Bill Owens, the guy who produces it, was fired.
Okay.
But he was also fired, or he's leaving, I can't tell which, because he was in charge of 60 Minutes for years and years and years and years. And there was a very interesting piece in the New York Times about Bill Owens. 60 Minutes chief resigns in emotional meeting. The company is done with me. The news program has faced mounting pressure from both President Trump and its corporate ownership of Paramount, the parent company of CBS News. Now, Paramount is the parent company of CBS News. Paramount's controlling shareholder is somebody named Shari Redstone, who took over from Sumner Redstone.
Right.
And the Times says, and I quote, is eager to secure the Trump administration's approval for a multi-billion-dollar sale of her company to Skydance, a company run by the son of the tech billionaire Larry Ellison. She has expressed a desire. He does Oracle. She has expressed a desire to settle Trump's case, which stems from what the president has called the deceptively edited interview in October with Vice President Kamala Harris that aired on 60 Minutes. Legal experts have dismissed that suit as baseless and far-fetched.
Yes.
And many journalists at CBS News, the former home of Walter Cronkite and Mike Wallace, believe that a settlement would amount to a capitulation to Mr. Trump over what they consider standard issue gripes about editorial judgment. So in other words, there's no basis for the suit, but the person who runs the whole corporate organization has a multi-billion-dollar merger that she doesn't want Trump interfering with, so she's going to cave. That's basically the deal.
Yeah, I guess
Bill Owens is a man of principle, and he said, I'm not having any part of this. You tell me that I can't run my independent, 60 Minutes the way it ought to be run, I'm out of here. But he said, everybody else should not quit in protest or sympathy. Keep doing what you're doing because you guys are great.
Okay.
So that's the context for this clip.
Really know. All right. I'm not sure whether I don't know how to take that advice. I guess these guys will have to take it in their stride. It does occur to me, though, as you're telling the story and pointing out that, there's the multi-billion-dollar merger going on as between the children of the first billionaire who built the first company and the children of the other billionaire who built a different company, and just sort of thinking, I think we have it wrong with estate law in this country, where if you're the children of billionaires,
estate laws for little people.
You're gonna be a billionaire, and it doesn't really matter whether you make a product or not. Buy someone else's company, and then you can be a billionaire for your kids.
The billionaire guy who referred to everybody else as the little people, but that was
probably all of them
prescient in terms of how they look at everybody
True.
Else. But
that's not what this is. That clip is ready. All right, let's see. So this is the sign-off of the CBS Evening News last.
Finally tonight, a story that is personal for us here at CBS News. Our friend and colleague, Bill Owens, announced today he is stepping down as executive producer of 60 Minutes.
In its more than half a century on the air, 60 Minutes has prided itself on independent reporting. But Owens said he was no longer allowed to run the broadcast as it had been run and to make independent decisions.
60 Minutes is at the center of a lawsuit filed by then-candidate Donald Trump, who claims the broadcast has not been fair to him. CBS's parent, Paramount Global, is trying to resolve the suit as it works to complete a merger that needs government approval.
Owens has stood firm, insisting that 60 Minutes did nothing wrong and that he would not apologize.
Bill Owens was also the supervising producer of this broadcast. He's a man of great integrity. We will always be grateful to him for his wisdom, his guidance, and above all, his friendship.
And we cannot thank him enough. That is the CBS Evening News. I'm Maurice Dubois.
I'm John Dickerson. Evening News Plus is coming up on CBS News 24/7.
Yeah. So the reason the voices keep switching is that there's two anchors.
Yes, that is. I can see that. The rest of you can't see anything, but maybe you saw the CBS Evening News. They identified themselves at the end, but I guess that's
which is why it was good to play it till the end.
Yeah, okay. Looks like one of the local news channels with two anchors.
Yeah, what they said is, listen, in terms of integrity, our producer who has integrity retired, and the owner of this whole corporation who doesn't have integrity is a toady who's trying to suck up and agree to Trump's extortion. Just so you all know what's going on here. And we wish everybody the best of luck.
Yeah. Well, I think they disclosed it correctly, right? This whole thing depends on government approval for a merger, and you know how that can be. Ordinarily, that's not the case, but under this administration, it is. And you know how billionaires are; they want to keep their billions.
Listen, this all started long, long ago with Roone Arledge and the moving of news division into the infotainment division, where the sports people took over. And you know what happens when sports people take over a university. All the money goes to the football team, and
Right.
There's no money for anybody else.
It's a Barstool Evening News, essentially.
Yeah, something like that.
End up getting, maybe. Okay.
So that's what's going on, and I just thought I would mention that. I think it's a big story, and I think
I agree.
It's worth covering.
People are talking about it, varied reactions to it, depending on how cynical you are. Between, well, this is a heartfelt goodbye, and oh my God, it's a warning for us too. Hey, the whole evening news thing has collapsed decades ago, and don't worry about it.
Speaking of warning, let me just quote a Trump tweet. They should lose their license. Hopefully the Federal Communications Commission, as headed by its highly respected chairman, that's capital letters, HRC, Brendan Carr, his honor, will impose the maximum fines and punishment, which is substantial for their unlawful and illegal behavior. CBS is out of control at levels never seen before, and they should pay a big price for this. Make America great again. I mean, that is what he said.
Yeah.
And that's because 60 Minutes did a story which was not completely complimentary to him.
Yes. Well, you can't do that. That's crazy. In an authoritarian government. Everybody knows that.
Yeah. So the whole thing was over two segments that the show did. One was an interview with Zelensky, and the second was a report from Greenland, and he didn't like either one of them. And, Redstone, the head of the large engulf and devour mega corporation, is going to fold. It's going to cave. I mean, it's just it's pretty clear as to why. It's unfortunate that corporations no longer care about their reputations.
Yes, they care about. Well, it's been a long time since that they've decided. Well, what's really important, of course, is shareholder value, maximizing shareholder value. And the reason that that's important, I know that sounds almost like it's democratizing, but remember, the largest shareholders are them. So they're maximizing their value for themselves.
Right, exactly. So this is not all without consequence. This is a Reuters poll, Reuters Ipsos, that's out yesterday.
All right. Come on back in, since you were out.
Well, Trump approval rating dips. Many wary of his wielding of power. Reuters Ipsos poll finds many Americans oppose withholding university funds over disagreements. Few support Trump running for a third term. Some 42% of respondents to the six-day poll approved of Trump's performance, down from 43 and from 47 in the hours after his inauguration. He's never been popular.
Hours. Okay.
But he's less popular now.
Well, that's the way
basically, let's put it this way. He is approaching the levels of his first term.
That's levels never seen before, except when you saw them.
The only president less popular than Trump 2 is Trump 1.
Well, it does tend to run that way.
Biden was much more popular than he is.
Oh, okay. Yes, that's true. He won.
Up until the second 2 years of his term. Now, the start of Trump's term has left his political opponents stunned as he signed dozens of executive orders expanding his influence, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But while Trump's approval rating remains higher than the rating seen during most of his Democratic predecessor's presidency, which is to say Biden started hot and left cold, the results of the Reuters Ipsos poll suggest many Americans are uncomfortable with his moves to punish universities he sees as too liberal and to install himself as the board chairman of the Kennedy Center. 83% said the U.S. president must obey federal court rulings, and that includes 73% of Republicans.
Yes.
Even if he doesn't want to. Trump administration officials could face criminal contempt charges for violating a federal judge order halting deportations of alleged members of a Venezuelan gang who had no chance to challenge their removals.
Right.
So that's important. And share of respondents, 66%, said they didn't think the president should be in control of premier cultural institutions such as national museums and theaters.
Yes, well, that's becoming the
Smithsonian.
case. Yes, I spent some time on that one, on the Lindsay Halligan profile in the style section of the Washington Post.
Right.
Which, whatever. I mean, okay, it's in the paper. I read it. But danger. And the Kennedy Center is probably being laughed off.
Only 14% of adults think that he should control national museums and theaters.
I mean, that is very unusual. And so, I'm glad people recognize that as weird and uncomfortable, and they should.
This fits in with another
laugh off
topic.
The Kennedy Center thing, but not the Smithsonian.
Yeah. If you want to do something with a Kennedy, fire RFK Jr., but let the
Yes, by all
cultural
means.
thing leave alone. And we've been talking about this, and we're going to continue to talk about this. I even have an article about us talking about this.
Oh.
But this is on immigration, the strongest area of support. 45% of respondents approve and 46% disapprove.
Okay.
So keep that in mind because we're going to circle back to that. 59% of respondents, including a third of Republicans, said America was losing credibility on the global stage. I don't know what's wrong with the other 40% who don't see it. Three-quarters of respondents said Trump shouldn't run for a third term. Not that he can, but he's made noise about it, so I think all of that's important. So,
right.
In terms of the discussion about particularly Kilmar, Abrego, Garcia, but others, Politico had this really weird piece.
Mm-hmm.
Let me highlight the title and we'll go from there. Why Democrats keep talking about due process in the case of man mistakenly deported to El Salvador.
Why? Okay. Yeah, why?
Well, again, they're seeing everything through a political lens where Republicans rule and Democrats are cowering.
Uh-huh.
And so it's almost like I have to explain to myself because I don't really understand it. But apparently Democrats aren't cowed by Republican huge lead on immigration. Remember, they're -1 in that Reuters
poll. Right.
Democrats are lining up to defend Kilmar Abrego Garcia despite immigration policies traditionally favoring Republicans.
And yet it's
right.
not,
so the whole focus of this is,
sure.
I don't understand it. I went and looked at it. Let me explain to you what's going on. Democrats have a plan for fighting Donald Trump over the most high-profile deportation case in recent history. Don't make it about immigration. As the party lines up to defend Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland resident mistakenly deported to El Salvador by the Trump administration, Democrats are emphasizing due process and rule of law, sidestepping the thornier intricacies of immigration policy that have served as a drag on their party for years. Now, Chris Van Hollen goes and he supports one of his constituents, very straightforward talking points. This is wrong. This is about the rule of law. If it doesn't apply to him, it doesn't apply to any of us. Therefore, we're all at risk. Politico says, they're sidestepping the issue. Why are they sidestepping the issue? Because we write about how issues favor Republicans, and they are defying us, Politico, in terms of what they're doing. So we have to make it clear to our readers. We don't necessarily approve of this, but we have to tell you, apparently Democrats are winning on this issue.
What? But how are they doing that from disarray?
Yeah.
That's where they're in. We know
so,
this.
They
what they're in.
Go ahead and they interview people.
What? Why?
Yasemin Ansari, Democrat, Arizona. You have an individual Maryland resident, union member whose union leadership has been calling for his relief, married to a U.S. citizen. I mean, hitting all the right buttons, right? Who was kidnapped, arrested, wrongly deported to El Salvador. And it's terrifying because if it's allowed to be continued and let it go, it opens the door for this to happen again. It emboldens the Trump administration to continue to disappear people. And I think the most important part of the story is the lack of due process. And that's absolutely right. And as I said the other day on this show, fire all the consultants who say don't talk about this and hire the ones who tell you how to talk about it. This is how to talk about it.
Yeah, there's no escaping talking about it. It's this huge abdication of your job responsibilities. I know, I understand you also need to get elected, but that too, and it also, as it happens, it's a pretty good thing to talk about in order to get elected. People kind of liked America, and they wanted to, not see it dissolved.
Again, this is Politico, right? Yes, know what Republicans are going to do because they do it all the time. What? You care about illegal criminals and you don't care about the children of these angel moms who got killed. And the Democrats say, I don't know what you're talking about. This has nothing to do with that. This is about due process. And the next person that could be kidnapped is you. Yes. I mean, it's a perfectly rational and powerful and effective response to that stuff. And so Politico, the New York Times, and all the other media, a caveat about that in a moment, go with the Republican line that well, we have a superior argument because it's simple, straightforward, and it always works. I don't understand why Democrats are bucking us on this. And that's the whole tone of this and every other story about what Democrats are doing, rather than Democrats are taking a strong stand because parties have to stand for something, and what the Republicans are doing are wrong. You never see that in a place like Politico. Now, the caveat about the media is that I criticize them when they screw up, which is all the time, because we're the ones that read them. People who read the stuff that we talk about voted for Harris.
Yes.
It's people who never listen to the news and never read any of this stuff that voted for Trump, more of them, so he won. So I totally understand that. And it's not like if the media got it exactly right the way we say, would it have changed the election? No, because it's the people who don't listen to them and don't read them and don't watch 60 Minutes or CBS Evening News, that elected Trump. So that's the caveat. But having said that, given that we're the audience, we demand that they do it right.
Yes, that would be nice.
They don't have us. They don't have anybody.
Right. Who are you doing it for? Yeah. If not us. Yeah. Not that quote. That's not what this means.
Well, no. It's for the party of one, because they are probably going to have a merger and they just don't want the government getting in the way. I mean, it's all extortion. The guy is a mob boss. And again, you just have to say it plainly. And these media outlets ought to say the same.
Yeah.
So Politico points out Abrego Garcia has become a symbol of Trump's aggressive deportation agenda. Therefore, every person advising Democrats not to talk about it has been proven wrong already.
Oh.
It's not a distraction. Yes. It's a main news topic, and Democrats are winning on the issue. And the Republicans are not ahead on immigration, and they're certainly not ahead when you do the nuance. Well, how about this particular case with this particular individual? Or what about people with green cards? What about people with visas? Democrats lead on those, not Republicans. People do not approve of what Trump is doing, and there's absolutely no reason not to talk about it. But you're distracting from our kitchen table issues. We can talk about that too.
Well, that's true.
There is no rule that says you can't talk about 3 or 4 things. If you want to talk about the economy first, that's fine, but you don't need to, because even people who don't watch the news understand the economy sucks and Trump is ruining it.
Yes.
How do I know? The polls say so.
It's background.
It's a given. You don't have to talk about that. You do have to talk about this, because if you ignore it, this guy rots in prison. That's no good. And Republicans are emboldened and they do it more. So absolutely talk about it.
Yes. And I mean, there are a million. I don't know how you could even counsel anybody to sidestep the issue. It's the Constitution, a major part of what we do here in the United States. And of course, it's all connected, right? I guess what Trump really needs to do is show off his sterling political instincts. The next step for him to do is to arrest and deport an actual kitchen table, and then bring everybody together.
Wrongly.
Now it's okay.
He's got to do it wrongly.
Yes, that's right. Well, without due process, of course.
This kitchen table was made in America.
Right, exactly.
You said it was an imported foreign kitchen table, and you have no proof.
Outrageous. Yeah.
Or, as somebody said on social media
now I care about
yesterday,
it because it's a kitchen table. Yes.
Yeah, there is no proof that J.D. Vance killed the Pope. There is no proof that J.D. Vance didn't kill the Pope, therefore sent him to an El Salvador prison.
That? Yeah. Well, we have to find out what the hell's going on around here. Look, they were in the same place at around the same time. It's not proof, but there's no proof of it, but there is evidence.
It's enough for us. We're sending him to El Salvador.
Yeah.
So this is how Politico finishes this.
Yes. Okay.
And I've been on this for a week or so, ranting about this, because it's just incredibly stupid on the part of Democrats to take seriously the argument that they shouldn't be talking about this. Democrats are hyper cautious. And they often want a lot of data before they finally start talking about it. Said Colin Rogerio. Notice he puts his name on this. A Democratic consultant who cut the Spanish language ads for the Biden and Harris presidential campaigns. But you're seeing members right now who are getting out in front of this, who are being aggressive. And I think you'll see other Democrats get on board as they see it's working.
That's true.
It's working.
That's a good call.
But they're also betting that the invocation of due process and sometimes wonky legal fight will resonate with the American public. They argue it'll allow them to place the debate around the case on their own terms after Republicans made immigration and the border a central part of their argument to voters in 2024, exploiting divides in the party on border enforcement. It's a bigger conversation about rule of law and what kind of country you are, said Evan Ross Smith, another Democratic consultant who puts his name on this instead of unnamed consultant.
Yeah.
A lead pollster for Democratic-aligned Blueprint. And it takes the Republicans out of their more comfortable immigration territory, which is, are we a country with a border or not, which is the case they successfully made to voters. Now, there's another clip I would love to play after the break.
Okay.
It's actually from a guy we both know, Cliff Schechter, but it's just the first couple of minutes of Chuck Grassley's town hall.
Okay, all right, yeah, we like checking out the town hall.
Just the first few minutes.
Yeah, it's not as much as we like him. It's not Cliff talking.
It's not Cliff. Cliff presents it later.
You got to go listen to his show.
Yeah, well, this is simply a clip of Grassley hearing it from his constituents.
Good,
and I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, well, we've played a lot of good clips from around the country, and it's good to know that this sentiment is still going, and people are going to the town halls and confronting them and giving them a really hard time. Good.
Yeah, but this is really recent, and it's the topic we were just talking about, which is why I want to play it.
Well, that's sensible and all that stuff. But I like just having people yelling at the Republicans. That seems fun, too.
That, too.
Yeah.
It's a twofer. You get both.
Okay. Well, we'll do that. We'll have to do it after the break because we're about to play that whole break music thing. Right. And it wouldn't sound
carefully
good.
Orchestrated so you had time to do it during the break.
Yeah. That thing. And I saw, we didn't have video of this, but I mentioned the other day, Nancy Mace had a confrontation with a constituent in a store at the mall over the weekend, we think, because all we hear is Nancy Mace's story. No, I don't think so. But you know how Nancy Mace is. She was murdered. She was murdered, and she came back from the dead to tell us the story of how Antifa killed her. You know how it is.
Okay.
Hi everybody, this is Scott Anderson, your summary guy. Were you looking forward to an egalitarian democracy free of bigotry, misogyny, racism, and greed, where people of different appearances, belief, and heritage had a right to live without fear, and everyone could expect a basic level of health, stability, and safety throughout their life? Well, too bad. The plain fact is that we're heading in the wrong direction. And where we once had a voice in such things, increasingly we don't. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. However, if you're looking to join people who understand today's issues and can intelligently address the reality of today from your point of view, you can join us at Kagro in the morning. As you know, there aren't many of us out there, at least compared to them. We need to stick together, and by that I mean send us money. That is contributions to patreon.com, secure, reoccurring contributions. Those contributions keep this show on the air and us together. We've been through a lot together. The temporary loss of the presidency, we hope. The temporary loss of the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, we hope. Face it, we are pretty much all that we have left. Remember, we couldn't do it without you, and you shouldn't do it without us. We're in this together, so thanks.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Well, really, welcome back to Cliff Schechter's show. Or in a minute, we're going to play a clip from... Cliff has like 9 shows, I think, too. And this is Cliff's Edge has got... This is his YouTube channel, and this is what Greg was telling us about before the break, but let's reset here. What the hell is this thing, Greg?
So this is a Chuck Grassley town hall. Yeah. And people are giving him a hard time, which is great, but they're giving him a hard time about his stance on Abrego Garcia and other things that the Trump administration is doing, which aren't kosher, which even in Iowa is a big deal.
Right, and this was a big time. It was a big week for kashrut. Just this one passed. But
right. So what Trump is doing is not kosher for Passover.
Exactly. Now, Passover is over, but this was during. When was this from? I don't know, but just recently posted. So right at the beginning, they just get right to it. Huh? I see lots of people looking gruff. It's an older skewing crowd, like the protests too, by the way. All right, let's roll this audio. Wow, hold on a second. I'll work on the volume on that. But you can see what's going on.
I don't think it's turned up high enough.
Maybe. All right. Well, let's see here.
I'm pissed. We would like to know what you, as the people, the Congress, who are supposed to rein in this dictator, what are you going to do about it? These people have been sentenced to life imprisonment in a foreign country with no due process. Our government cannot do anything.
It's not the statement, it's the applause.
Right, true. And that's not Grassley saying he's going to stand up for the Constitution. That's the constituent. And police standing by in the room as well, heavily armed as usual, but just abiding. And everybody clapping. And is there more from this guy?
A little bit more.
All right.
Why won't you do your job, Senator?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's true. And there's Cliff's.
That's enough. Cliff's
up next. But yeah, we don't want to steal his IP. but another one of Cliff's walk and talk things. Yeah, I mean, he wants it circulated, of course. But, it may take him 5 minutes to get this point across. And it's a good one. But so you take a look for it. Cliff's Edge. MAGA turns on GOP senator, as we like to call him. Tears him a new one at town hall.
Well, the whole thing is only 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, so everyone can listen and digest. I'm going to suggest 11:01 to about 11:06 for that, if you're listening on East Coast time. Okay.
So in that regard, I want to do this story here. Illinois, Indiana college students celebrate temporary victory after judge orders visas reinstated. More than 100 international students are celebrating a victory Tuesday. That's yesterday.
They'll gladly celebrate.
After a lawyer
Tuesday,
representing the students says the Trump administration complied with the Georgia District Court judge's order to reinstate their student visas for now.
Yes.
That group includes students from University of Illinois, Western Illinois University, and the Indiana Institute of Technology. I don't know if it also includes Case Western, and that was a separate case.
Western.
No pun intended. But
yes.
There's a transcript from the judge in the Case Western case, which is just fascinating. I have to read you
Case
a
Western
little bit.
case. Judge me,
and
judge.
For reasons which I'm not clear, the lawyer's name is blanked out.
Case. That's just
and
to
the
make
defendant's
it less
name
confusing.
is blanked out.
Case Western.
And I don't know if this is routine, but here's how the transcript goes. Mr. X, I'm not able to answer that question, Your Honor. The court, how are you not able to answer the question? What does that even mean? He's either here legally or he's not here legally. You're the government's lawyer. Is he here legally? I mean, how is this guy supposed to know if he's here legally if you don't even know if he's here legally? Lawyer, he was lawfully admitted to the United States. The court, no. No, there's a yes or no answer here. This is not Schrodinger's visa. Either he's here legally or he's not here legally. If you can't answer the question, you have to explain to me why you can't answer the question. Well, the lawyer said, I cannot answer the question. I've talked to ICE as to whether or not they consider at this point in time, the individual, whether or not they're maintaining lawful status. And what does ICE say? Well, I haven't received a response, Your Honor.
Yeah. Well, the people who respond were fired.
So the court responds to that.
Yeah.
Do you realize that this is a Kafkaesque? I've got two experienced immigration lawyers on behalf of a client who's months away from graduation, who's done nothing wrong, who's been terminated from a system that you all keep telling me has no effect on his immigration status, although that's clearly BS. And now that's a quote, and now his two very experienced lawyers can't even tell him whether or not he's here legally, because the court can't tell him whether or not he's here legally, because the government's counsel can't tell him whether or not he's here legally. So the judge was not pleased and issued a temporary restraining order.
Okay. Yeah, I'm wondering about the redaction. I don't know if that was legally required anywhere. I mean, it was the government's lawyer, but I could see the DOJ now trying, without any policy behind it, saying, I want you to blank out the names of people who represent the government in court because they could be targeted by terrorists and Antifa. But yeah, that's not the normal practice. And though it may have been, maybe the person who posted it decided to go ahead and do that. I don't know why, but this is all supposed to be a matter of public record.
Yeah. So pretty crazy stuff. Speaking of crazy stuff, let's talk about Pete Hegseth.
Oh, that guy.
And I
Hold on,
have
let me get a drink.
really. I played the Cliff Schechter tape. I won't play, a clip of this, but there's a really fascinating podcast that Greg Sargent did at the New Republic, interviewing national security expert. I keep getting my natural and national mixed up because of that LNG thing.
Natural history and national security.
Yeah.
Expert. Both.
Juliet Kayyem, who's really good at this stuff.
Ah, yes. Okay.
And the topic is Don Jr. and MAGA erupt as goppers start turning on Hegseth. They're actually referring to that article that we did on Monday from Politico. Remember
they're
from
discussing the
sycophant
article?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. The
everybody's reacting to that article.
Non-Trump supporter.
Yeah, it's pivotal, it's seminal, it's really important. And Don Jr. said, "Oh, this guy is terrible. He's trying to undermine my father's agenda. I exile him from MAGA."
Yeah, he's in charge of exiling.
He's in charge of exiling. He's the exiler in chief.
Yeah. Well, he's the guy who inherits all the money, like the other stories, the billionaires who give the money to the kids.
So they go over the whole Pete Hegseth story and what's going on, and says, Greg Sargent says to Juliet, is there any planet on which this doesn't get worse, much worse politically for Trump over time? And Juliet says, no. Because Hegseth was unqualified to run the Pentagon. The Republican senators knew he was unqualified. His Fox News colleagues were leaking information before he was confirmed about how unqualified he was in terms of temperament, substance abuse, which is to say he drank like a fish, in terms of relationships with women, and nobody listened. I feel very strongly he needs to be out. And Greg Sargent says, well, Trump Jr. does not. Trump Jr. erupted in fury over that op-ed from Ulyat, the one that we read on Monday. That's the one where he said, and more is coming. Trump Jr. said, this guy is not America first. He's out to subvert my father's agenda. He's officially exiled from our movement. The thing is, John Ulyat is a staunch loyalist to Trump. And his op-ed included all this absurd praise for Trump, as if packaging the truth about Hegseth with adulation of Trump might make it more likely the audience of one would actually take it seriously. But I guess that's not enough.
Yeah, or the audience of one
don't know.
Have.
We don't know, because there's early reporting and they're looking for a replacement.
Yeah. That's funny, and that will be, I don't know whether that would ever become something of an embarrassment to Don Jr., like fighting the last war out there saying, how dare he, I'm going to exile him, and then his dad actually says, actually, that guy sucks, we're firing him.
Well, this gets to a really interesting point that Greg and Juliet discussed.
Well.
When it comes to opposition, when it comes to fighting back, when it comes to resistance.
Yes.
And
when it comes to
Greg says, how extensive is it? Juliet at one point in the interview said, you have to understand that everybody in the Pentagon hates Pete Hegseth. They hate him.
You would think.
Leaking stuff, they all do. And she says, I want people to understand. I know there's this whole Doge thing and efficiency and like only our people should survive and everybody else should leave. I just want to give a sense of the numbers because this was one of the best lessons I ever learned as a political appointee. Mm-hmm. When I went into one of the major departments, my cabinet secretary that I reported to said to me, you need to, in terms of engagement, listening, functionality, all the things you want to do as a manager and as a leader, you have to remember there are 287,000 of them, talking about the career staff, and 100 of us.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty accurate distribution at most of the agencies. You can only lose an agency that needs to function so much, and the Pentagon needs to function. So you can't just like fire everybody who's anti-Hegseth. The entire Pentagon would be gone.
That's maybe the one department that stands out in that respect, that they've actually attempted that experiment in all the other departments. Well, why don't we fire the other? Because there's not 200,000 per 100. In the other departments, it's much less, and it's not the Army.
But it's not. It's usually 1 to 1,000. That's like in most of the departments.
Yes, I mean, they're outnumbered for sure. But yeah, in the Pentagon, it's just that much more pronounced.
287,000.
And it's hard
that's a lot of people.
And it's a branch that people would miss. Oh, we fired the Army. Really? That is very interesting.
And then she adds something that also
Russia
has been driving me crazy that I've mentioned on the show.
Yes.
Can I just say one piece of this? She says, we talk about process and qualification with Hegseth. It's also worth noting his one military program, increased efforts against the Houthis, is a failure. So it's not like he can say, well, I'm a tough guy and I'm bombing the Houthis and everything. We've lost 6 major drones. Each one costs $30 million.
No, I knew.
The passageway in the Suez is still dangerous. The effort that was discussed on Signal has not been successful. And so, again, I go back to media the day after the bombing started. Successful bombing
Well, it blew up.
We've seen this drill before. We've seen this in Iraq. We've seen this in other places. What makes it a success? Because the bombs landed? Where do you think they're going to go after you drop them out of the
mission
plane?
accomplished? Right. Okay. So we have what they're saying is we have video footage of an explosion.
Yes, exactly.
And that's the success. And of course that enables, the normal trust that people have in their government, which has been eroding for a long time since before Trump, but this is just accelerating. It is allows the media to then say, well, I mean, I got the video of the explosion. Give me the background. What's exploding? Oh, all the Houthis. Right. All right. Well, then that's it.
So Greg Sargent says, and you got Donald Trump Jr., and then you have Charlie Kirk trying to blame criticism of Hegseth on neocons and the woke. And here's a quote from him. This warrior ethos is ascendant. Pete Hegseth stands in the way of the neocons and the woke. MAGA, Greg Sargent says, really thinks Hegseth is their guy. And I think what they mean by that is Hegseth is the guy who's going to turn the Pentagon into a force for imperialism in the world. You talk about this idea of a warrior ethos. It's a deeply sick concept. And remember that because we're going to get to Mark Wayne Mullen. It's a deeply sick concept, the plumber who never served. It's a deeply sick concept that they've got when you consider in the context of the threats to Greenland and the threats to annex Canada. They really think they've got the guy who's going to do this stuff if Trump orders it. And Juliette Kayyem says that's exactly right. And let's not forget Panama or the homeland. Pete Hegseth's only major deployment so far has been the border. And last week, we lost 3 service members in a traffic fatality. But things happen at deployments. And I don't even know if Hegseth mentioned it, but that's what happens when you deploy lots of people for missions they ought not to be in. So this warrior ethos is very tied to the anti-DEI, effeminate, trans, ethnic purge, whatever, of the major leaders that Hegseth have gotten rid of. In the Pentagon, 50% of them are women. Anybody who knows the Pentagon knows we probably have about 5 or 6% senior leadership being women, so it's disproportionately hitting women. And this is the makeup of who's in the room, and that aligns with a sense that is inconsistent with what Trump promised MAGA, but they just follow him wherever he goes, which is that America is too overextended.
Right.
What Hegseth
so
wants,
let's extend into Canada and Greenland.
What Hegseth wants to describe what the warrior ethic is he doesn't want an equal fight. He wants to use our military to punch down. So they hide from Russia, they hide from Ukraine. It reminds me of invading Grenada or Panama. That's the kind of military that
we have to do that
wants,
again now.
what Juliet is saying. Yeah. To make America great again, let's invade little countries that we can win.
It's a strategy.
So, Greg Sargent says, so if I read you correctly, you're saying the supposedly hyper-masculine, super tough warrior ethos of Pete Hegseth is all about winking and nodding at the world's other bullies and letting them do whatever they want in their spheres of influence. And the warrior ethos and the MAGA strength comes in the form of imperialism over the weak in our sphere of influence. And Juliet says that's exactly right. Now, given that context of the discussion, because I think it's she makes a couple of really important points worth emphasizing. Most of the Pentagon hates Hegseth. He's still in trouble. He's limited. She says he's just not long for this world, meaning he's not going to be there too long. It's unsustainable.
Cirrhosis.
Driven not by Trump's, desire not to give the liberals a scalp, but rather driven by Hegseth's own incompetence because worse things are going to happen because he is who he is. So it's going to happen. And she also makes the point about the number of political appointees versus career employees at most of the agencies. We have Don Bacon, who's already coming out saying Hegseth should go. It's just, it can't last. So you have all of that. And then you have this quote from Mark Wayne Mullen, who posted this yesterday, 2 days ago.
Yeah, okay.
2 days ago. And let me quote it. I will lead the breach. I will lay down cover fire. I will take the high ground. I'll expose myself to enemy fire to communicate. We must bring back integrity, focus, and the war fighter first. I stand with Pete Hegseth.
Okay.
This is, again, a guy who never served. He talks tough, but he's a plumber.
Well, America needs plumbers.
Yeah.
America
needs more cosplay because we don't have enough of Kristi Noem, who can't even guard her own purse.
Right, true. Well, soon someone needs to steal Mark Wayne Mullen's purse.
Yeah, more follow-up. And again, I just want to point out, people get frustrated because things aren't happening fast enough. A lot of this stuff is lightning speed. This is from Politico. Group boosting Hegseth goes quiet. The defense secretary has come under heavy scrutiny and reports a dysfunction in the Pentagon, and this is about a MAGA-aligned group which does a lot of the PR.
Yeah.
Mark Lucas, founder of the group and a veteran of the Article 3 project that was instrumental in Hegseth's confirmation, says, I'm not putting any defense up about Hegseth because it's Easter and I'm devout.
Okay. It's over.
He said,
can't even
Mark Lucas
rely
told
on
Politico,
Eastern Orthodoxy.
He's trying not to do media, and at the moment, and besides, Signalgate was a hoax.
I see. And the second Signalgate?
How is it a hoax?
I don't know.
What about it was it happened? They acknowledged it happened. They claim it isn't what you think it is, but it's not a hoax.
Oh, and then the guy's like, "Oh, is that what hoax means? I thought hoax meant I don't like it." The way Trump uses it. I thought that was. I never looked up the definition of hoax. You're right. It's not a hoax. It's just bad.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just one of the things they do. Trying to wave off.
A lot of the people who were aligned with this pro-Hegseth outside group were fired by Hegseth.
What, recently or
no?
A long time ago.
His chief of staff was having a feud with some of his other most trusted and loyal advisors, quote unquote. And so they left and were accused of leaking, and they said, we didn't leak. The chief of staff is a jerk. They're all out now.
Right.
All of the people around Hegseth have been fired. And in the statement, Mark Lucas, this pro-Hegseth group leader, said, it was suspicious that two of Secretary Hegseth's most trusted and loyal advisors were the initial targets of an investigation to identify leakers undermining President Trump. Well, yeah.
Okay. Right.
So your point is what?
I'm not sure.
Your guys who you were supporting are now out, and Hegseth is basically running around the building in meltdown, screaming at everybody.
Yeah, cool.
And now what?
I didn't.
Well, it's all a hoax.
Yeah, that's an approach.
What part is it? What part is a hoax? Was it a hoax that these guys were Hegseth supporters? Was it a hoax that they
That's
were
a good question. I'm not sure.
I mean, what do you mean hoax?
We don't know. And it's probably just a misuse of the word entirely. But remember, I guess this is also of a piece with the White House's and certain White House advisors, and I mean here Stephen Miller and others, but Miller's the one who's been on record with it, that they're just saying that the 9-0 ruling from the Supreme Court said the opposite of what it said. I mean, it was written. We can all read it.
Which is why you got the midnight,
it's a hoax.
Look, you can't send any more people overseas till we get to the bottom of this.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, they're on to it, but I don't know how strongly they're going to react to it, but they are on to it. But I didn't get initially, that's funny, when you said, the PR group supporting Hegseth has gone quiet. My first read of that headline was, they're embarrassed by his idiocy and they're not interested in defending him. And the excuse is it's Easter.
There's no such thing as embarrassment.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, right. Exactly. I'm not sure. But in the initial response, the usual first read on things like that in politics are, so now the hypocrites are silent. They were always screaming to the press, couldn't get enough coverage. All of a sudden, something so embarrassing happens. They got nothing to say. But as you point out, as you read through the story, it becomes clear that maybe it may also be, Well, they've gone quiet because the group is populated by people who he took with him to the Pentagon and then screwed over and fired, and the group that was supposed to have his back all hate him now. That's amazing.
And also link all the important stuff.
I didn't catch that at first.
To us so that we can publish it, and make recordings and otherwise
which is another
and now they're gone and we don't have anybody giving us it, so we're quiet.
Yeah, that's true too. But yeah, another astounding angle on all of this is listen, I'm telling you this off the record, you can't put my name to it. That jackass, he fired me for leaking. Now don't tell anybody that I told you this. Are you leaking?
Why do you want to join the Secret Service? Said the old Monty Python routine. Can you keep a secret? Okay, you're in.
I mean, wow, it's okay. Levels and
right. So meanwhile,
levels. Yes,
Gallup record high 53% of Americans now say their financial situation is getting worse. The first time since 2001 that a majority has expressed financial pessimism.
Really?
And that's because record high number of Americans don't need to listen to cable news to know what's going on in their lives. So it's okay if they don't watch MSNBC. They still know the economy sucks.
Every day you go to buy something for dinner tells you that things are going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, what's that got to do with the price of eggs?
I don't know. So
this is Jamel Bouie writing in the New York Times. Trump wants you to think resistance is futile. It is not. And
all right.
Resistance is futile. I can't remember if that's the Borg.
Yes.
From Star Trek or the Vogons from Hitchhiker's
also
Guide.
Did. But I recognize it from the Borg in Star Trek. They may have copied it off of. Who knows?
I don't know.
Okay.
Resistance is futile. It is not. And he talks about the fact that one of the striking dynamics in the first months of the second Trump administration was the extent to which so many politicians seemed to lack the ambition to directly challenge the president. There was a sense that the smart path was to embrace the apparent vibe shift of 2024 and accommodate oneself to the new order. Politico certainly fell for it. That was part of my rant about how they cover Democrats actually speaking up against and about Abrego Garcia's treatment.
Mm-hmm.
But events have moved the vibe in the other direction. Ambition is making a comeback. And then he highlights Chris Van Hollen. And listen, if that's where ambition takes you, great. I would say the same for our own Chris Murphy.
Yes.
If that's where ambition takes you, wonderful. Same with AOC. If you want to get out there and talk about this because you're ambitious, that happens to parallel and go right along with what's right and what's wrong, more power to you.
Yeah. I can't
Instead of cowering and saying, oh, this is an issue that favors Republicans, we can't say anything about it. What are you, an idiot? Of course you can. What you have to do is figure out how to talk about it.
It's spurring other members of Congress to do the same thing or similar.
Yeah, you know who's next?
No.
Speaking of loving camera, Cory Booker. He's organizing a trip to El Salvador.
What do you know? Are there... is it all about Abrego Garcia, or are they going also about constituents of their own? Do they? I haven't seen whether they're.
I don't know, but I'm not certain highlight something. If it gets really complicated if you keep doing different people.
I guess
keep it simple.
But I mean, the great one of the things that shielded Van Hollen initially was that he was doing this as part of constituent service.
So that's why he goes first. Everybody else can go too. Robert Garcia of California arrived in El Salvador yesterday.
Okay. I saw Ed Markey going somewhere, not El Salvador, though. I think one of the other border detention facilities here in the country, but I don't know. I'm not certain. Now I forget where he was headed. But he too, doing it in the same style, in the Van Hollen style. Film it. Take your phone. You're your own media. That was really another great lesson of the Van Hollen effort, was like, I'm not getting media coverage in this. I'm going to do my own. And then people's interest in it will drive the networks.
And I'll put the clips on social media because I'm not 90 years old like Chuck Grassley.
Right.
So the New York Times says, while Donald Trump continues to defy the Supreme Court, Kilmar Abrea Garcia is being held illegally in El Salvador. Remember, Garcia's from California. It's not his constituent.
Right.
After being wrongly deported, Garcia said in a statement. That's why we're here, to remind the American people that kidnapping immigrants and deporting them without due process is not how we do things in America.
Right.
We are demanding the Trump administration abide by the Supreme Court decision and give Kilmar and the other migrants mistakenly sent to El Salvador due process in the United States. And all of this negative attention has had an effect, says the Times. It's not just that the president's overall approval rating has dipped into the low 40s, although it has, but that he's losing his strong advantage on immigration. 50% of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of immigration, according to Quinnipiac, and a new Reuters poll shows Trump slightly underwater on the issue, 45-46. We just covered that. Americans are even negative on the specifics. Most Americans, 82%, say the president should follow federal court rulings even when he disagrees with them. A smaller but still significant majority says the president should stop deporting people in defiance of court orders. And they're broadly opposed to the deportation of undocumented immigrants who have lived in the U.S. for long periods of time, or who have had children who are U.S. citizens, or who are law-abiding except for breaking immigration law. So yes. Americans love tough talk, but when it comes to real actions, they're much less supportive. So there's every reason to do this. And again, this reminds me, this is what happens when you're old. You think of parallels. This reminds me of W when it took forever, or as we say in Brooklyn, forever, for the media to acknowledge that W wasn't popular anymore. Yes.
I'm not even certain they ever really did it.
Everything was the popular W does this, the popular President Bush does that. He's not that popular.
Right.
He skyrocketed after 9/11, but then it dropped like a stone for the rest of his career as president, and they never got to the point of saying, oh, well, it's not sky high anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess they figured they would retire before they had to do that. And now they just get to say the mild-mannered, pleasant guy who paints.
Times goes on to say Democrats are also highlighting the vital importance of political leadership. Hello.
Hello. Yeah. Well, what can I tell you? This is you're right to draw this parallel, and it just comes up every day. I don't know how we didn't see it before. I mean, how they continue to insist, even in the face of numbers that say the absolute opposite, that they're so it's so ingrained
People
in their
support
fabric.
Trump on immigration
And imitation.
Actually,
no
imitation. Yeah,
not having
immigration is the sincerest form of flattery, actually, and so is tourism.
Yeah,
and nobody wants to come here anymore.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, no, they can't afford to. They're getting rounded up at the border. No one's getting through. Thank you, Greg. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow. Although I'd keep you on here another hour if I could, and I could. You just wouldn't say anything. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just so much to tell you about, things that are breaking now, things that I have put away, things that I haven't put away, things that I wish I had put away and I see repeated on social media. Like, for instance, the Blue Sky post this morning from Carl Quintanilla, or Quintanilla, I don't know whether he pronounces it with the L sound or not, but a very widely followed reporter with experience at CNBC, NBC, Wall Street Journal, the whole works, and he shares with everyone this morning a clip from Axios, about which we also have more commentary from Asita Nwanevu, who I think I've tried to pronounce his name before. I do see him quite frequently making poignant commentary on Blue Sky as well. Contributing editor at the New Republic at the moment, a columnist at The Guardian, an author in his own right, a newsletter publisher, as we all are these days, and a great commentator at that. Carl sharing what he says should be the top story in Axios' morning read, but it isn't. It's the fifth story on the list, the fifth top story. What is that story? The clip that he shares with us, I think, should suffice. The Trump administration It reads, has teased 3 new tactics as part of their immigration crackdown, which could expand to include deporting convicted U.S. citizens, Axios' Brittany Gibson writes. And this probably, I don't know, this should have been read alongside the things Greg was pointing out. That, again, it's like the inability of the insider Beltway press in particular, the political professional press that doesn't view the death of due process, like the founding concept of this nation, as anything but in the old Chuck Todd days. It's so crazy it just might work. Like, they're getting rid of the Constitution, but how's it playing in Peoria, right? What does it matter? It's the foundational document of the country. It's a news item in itself and deserves coverage. Well, it just might work. No, I mean, it might work in that we could fall into dictatorship and, sure, constitutional liberalism is a mode of governance, a mode of political, engagement, but it's not the only one. Well, that's true. But if the major foundational concept of the country is being replaced with something else, you can report that. It's true that it might just work, but you should let people know. Throw out the copies of the Constitution that you have at home and stop thinking that you have rights if you're stopped by the police, just so that you're not surprised. But no, that's not the way they cover it. And I guess it's the case at Axios too. So again, the clip says the Trump administration has teased 3 new tactics as part of their immigration crackdown, which could expand to include deporting convicted U.S. citizens, Axios' Brittany Gibson writes. And even in our first read, we kind of read right through it. But let's pause and say, I know it's been in the news, we've discussed the possibility, but again, Axios finally acknowledging, that could mean U.S. citizens could get warehoused forever with no opportunity to go before a judge or have any hope whatsoever of ever being released from prison. And even if they were released from prison, they would be being released from prison in El Salvador, which is not their country. And so what the hell are you doing? What's the Axios way of handling this? One, they just list it. And here it is. And it's so crazy it just might work, as opposed to commentary like, no, this can't happen. 1, send convicted U.S. citizens to prisons abroad. This has been floated as a spinoff of Trump's deal with El Salvador, where a high-security prison is holding about 300 U.S. immigration detainees that the administration says are suspected criminal gang members. And, of course, they suspect everyone of being a criminal gang member, so it's not particularly surprising. But they have done nothing whatsoever to actually prove that, naturally. I mean, I think that should be of some concern, don't you? Let's see. The other 2 bullets in their description of the Trump tactics. 2, put critics of the administration's policies in jeopardy. So we've already heard about warehousing American prisoners abroad. Some officials say U.S. citizens who criticize administration policies, I think we know a couple people who've done that, could be charged with crimes based on the notion that they're aiding terrorists and criminals. Wow. I mean, but again, that's not new. We heard the dreadful Hungarian Sebastian Gorka, who is some kind of counterterrorism czar in this administration, say on the air, or we discussed that he had said it on the air, that he thinks that, given that we are, one, lying and I don't know what, embellishing the story of, first we lie and say Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a gang member. Then we lie and expand on that and say he's actually a leader in the gang. And then the big leap, which is gang membership, because of course this gang is somehow, it's not even really, I don't think, is it even based in El Salvador? It's really something that is domestic here, and as to the extent it exists at all, is a gang membership of Salvadoran expatriates, I guess, however you want to put it. But the gang is mostly, I think, organized among them. But I'm not really sure about that now that I think about it. And it may be the case that is. I'm thinking of Tren de Aragua to the extent that is a thing, and I may be wrong about both. I don't know, but I don't think that the gang. There's certainly a gang problem, probably in both countries. Certainly, notoriously in El Salvador. But I got the sense that the gangs that were operating, if they were operating in the United States, weren't, like being directed from Venezuela or El Salvador in any real sense. But that didn't hardly even matters. One, they can just lie about it. And two, they will lie about it. They have lied about it because it's central to their premise. What they're doing is saying, one, people like Kilmar generally are gang members. We'll just lie if necessary. Two, that, even if they don't pin them with leadership roles, they're saying, well, okay, because they are being directed by gang leaders in a foreign country, and our theory is that they're being sent to this country to undermine our way of life, our rule of law, even though all of that is being undermined every day from the White House. But in another way, they are undermining all of this. And third, that this is some kind of international plot that they like to label as an invasion. Now, they're doing that for a couple of reasons, right? They're saying, well, one, it's to be hyperbolic. There's so many, and they're so different from us, and they're brown, and we don't like it, and they speak Spanish, and they eat tacos, and they don't. But that's the way, that's the stereotype we want to hang on. And they're taking all our jobs, and all the things that they like to say about immigrants. And then they get hyperbolic about it. There's so many of them that it's like an invasion. In fact, it is an invasion. And we're going to start using that terminology, which was originally started as just sort of a dumb, overstated metaphor. And then they got to the point where they said, well, what if we just actually call it an invasion for real in the actual military sense? That is the sense of the word that would trigger our ability to use all sorts of emergency presidential powers, which were always assumed to exist and sometimes actually litigated and established. But with respect to, we got invaded by, take your pick, the Confederacy at Gettysburg, or we're worried about being invaded by Japanese forces during World War II, German forces during World War II, whatever it is, we're worried about actual invasions of the homeland by organized state actors with their state militaries. And then, of course, the global war on terror gave us the opportunity to blur that line and say, well, I don't think we ever really worried about invasion by Al-Qaeda, but we certainly worried about attack in the homeland by Al-Qaeda. And while you're busy blurring the lines, let's just take that metaphorical invasion. After all, they were there and now they're here. Are they invading? Well, they're invading in the sense that they are lining up outside for day labor and building houses for us and maintaining our gardens and picking our produce and paying taxes while they're here to do it. Traditional invasion stuff. But they ignore all of that, and they're basically saying, well, they're different from us, they speak a different language, and we don't want them here, so that's an invasion. It's not, but that's the leap that they're making. So they're invading, that's bad. And of course, because they're invading, that usually brings along with it the assumption that there's some sort of military or otherwise organized violence against Americans, because that's how you invade places. And yet that's not really happening. But what is sometimes happening is there are crimes committed. Some of them are violent crimes. Some of them are committed by people who have come here from other countries. And Although 90%, 99% of the people who come here from other countries then actually try to get jobs and provide for their families and pay taxes on the money that they're earning. One guy, two guys, 10 guys, whatever it is, who came here from that same country where 99% of the people who come here are not only law-abiding, but doing anything they can to stay out of the sight of law enforcement for various reasons, and so have every disincentive to commit any kind of a crime. But someone from their country commits a crime, and so therefore there's the violence. Oh, but it was already an invasion, and now we have the violence, and now it's a military-style invasion, and not only is it that, but I'll bet that some of the people who were victims of this crime, and of course everybody who read about the crime on Facebook and saw the feature film, the made-for-TV movie about it on the Lifetime Network, which loves nothing better than true crime series stuff, is now afraid. And when we say that they're afraid, we could also say they're terrified. And if they're terrified, then it must be terrorism. And so now we've gone around a second loop here. That migrants who come to this country, and even though all they really want to do is build houses, pick vegetables, do whatever work that they can do and not get in trouble for doing it and then pay taxes on it, are a military invasion and terrorists. And here is where Sebastian Gorka takes it to the next level. We're still stuck on point number 2 here. Put critics of the administration's policies in jeopardy. Some officials, Sebastian Gorka, say U.S. citizens who criticize administration policies, like that these incidents are an invasion and terrorism. No, they're not. What? Are you trying to tell me that this person who we're going to arrest and charge with terrorism isn't a terrorist? Yes, because he's not a terrorist. Oh, yeah? Well, what you're doing is aiding and abetting that terrorism. No, it's not possible. It's not terrorism to begin with. I can't aid and abet terrorism if it isn't terrorism. Well, we say it is. And you trying to say that it's not, i.e. trying to get the charges dismissed, is obstructing justice and, in fact, is a kind of terrorism all unto itself, is what Sebastian Gorka and others are saying. I mean, that's an enormous expansion, a crazy expansion. And, of course, I mean, had we attempted to do something like that, if you are, had Kamala Harris won the election and the Justice Department said, everybody who is saying that January 6th defendants ought to be exonerated and freed is now considered guilty of domestic terrorism, they would have gone insane. Insane. They'd be screaming their heads off about the tyranny and we need Second Amendment solutions and all sorts of things like that. But, of course, every Republican accusation being a confession, they've gone straight to that. That's number 2 in this story. Axios acknowledging it, and yet it's not the top story of the day. And it wasn't even our top story either, so I suppose, we can't blame them too much for that. But we recognize its importance, and I don't think Axios does. By the way, the third point here, question the authority of court orders. The administration's resistance to returning Kilmar Abrego Garcia has raised questions about how far Trump's team can go in trying to skirt court orders. And the reason the court issued its middle of the night 7-2 ruling, and the reason it issued its previous 9-0 ruling during daytime hours to that was to send the message, we know that you are making every attempt you can to skirt court orders. That's a bad thing. We can't stand for it. But number 2 seems like kind of a big deal. Put the critics of the administration's policies in jeopardy. And there's lots of examples of that. But okay, so that is Carl Quintanilla's pointing out, hey, don't you think this should be more of a top story? In the meantime, Osita Nwanevu has this to say about it. The one that struck him as important, same one. Some officials say U.S. citizens who criticize administration policy should be charged with crimes. And he comments here, I always wondered how mainstream journalism would cover an impending dictatorship here. And now we know. It's not with hair on fire coverage. It's Well, we've received word that some officials say U.S. citizens who criticize administration policies should be charged with crimes, like every other dictatorship in the world. And it's actually fairly serious. So I mentioned to you that there are other examples of this going on, not just Sebastian Gorka saying anybody who defends the rights in court or outside of court, just mention, if you mention that this person has rights, that might be an obstruction of justice. You might convince someone that you're right, and they may do something. So therefore, you too are a terrorist. That's only the most extreme expression of it. But there are many other examples, and most of these threats against law firms are kind of aimed at that as well. You can't advocate for people caught up in the so-called immigration system, and you can't advocate for anybody who's opposing the dodgy cuts. You can't represent or even express support for anybody who says it might not be a good idea for Donald Trump to go to the funeral of the Pope even. It can be expanded to anything. So in addition to these threats against the law firms, there's an additional layer to that. It's not just, if you run the idea past Donald Trump, hey, why don't we threaten all the lawyers? And he says, okay, that's a great idea. You can understand him saying, let's start with the biggest law firms and the ones who have personally attempted to sue me or represented people I don't like. But how petty does it get? Radley Balco, who documents this sort of pettiness all the time, has a new beat on this. It's usually police violence, but this will be of interest to him too. He's got a piece in his Substack newsletter called The Watch, a piece entitled The Courage to be Decent. And I thought it was going in a different direction, and I'm sure at some point it must, because it's illustrated with a picture of Chris Krebs, the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And I can't believe they put security in that name twice. But he too, he was targeted with his own so-called executive order, which we read good points about the executive orders in general. Don't believe that they are real or that they do things. They're just shows, but you don't want to be singled out even in a show. But the main point of this piece, as far as I read it, which would say the first half of it, doesn't really have anything to do with Chris Krebs. But I'm sure he comes up somewhere else. Instead, he tells this story. One of the more pernicious effects of authoritarianism is to make the everyday participation in civic life we take for granted feel subversive, with things like Sebastian Gorka, the dreadful Hungarian, saying, if you think that people have been wrongly accused and you say so, you are obstructing justice and therefore criminal yourself, and you better watch out. Wow. That'll do it. Now, Radley Balco continues, the goal isn't to police all behavior at all times. That would be just too difficult. And here, I'll remind you that Trump posted on Truth Social just the other day his most straightforward abandonment of constitutional principles so far, reminding everybody that the reason that there's no due process for the people he's targeting in immigration raids is because it would take too long. It would take like 200 years to give all those people trials. So we're just not going to do it. Oh, okay. Well, why is that too difficult? So no, the goal isn't to police all behavior at all times. That would be even more difficult. But the goal is to make us fearful to the point that we police our own behavior. And we start saying things like, I'd better think twice about that, or whether it's just a social media post or a comment on the air or an answer to a government official who might, or just speaking to your neighbors. What if this guy is a MAGA nut and he snitches me out or reports me as a illegal immigrant, even though there's nothing about me that presents in the classic case or the stereotypical racial profiling that the rest of the MAGA world would ordinarily be performing. Well, I don't know. It's enough for me that he said something I don't like, and a MAGA guy said he's an illegal immigrant, and we don't have to bother with courts anymore, so what the hell? Let's just go and do that. I should read through the rest of the Radley Balco thing here, but again, it reminds me of yet another thing that I wanted to bring to your bring up for your consideration. But here we go back to Radley Balco. So last month, speaking of trying to make us fearful to the point that we police our own behavior, last month, Clay Jackson, Clay Jackson. I don't know Clay Jackson, but that's the point. He's just a guy. Clay Jackson was at the gas station just up the street from his home in a Dallas suburb. Dallas, like that's all American and everything. This could happen to anybody. When one of the attendants at the gas station asked if he might provide some legal advice to an immigrant family. Clay Jackson is an attorney, a suspect class. I've added that. Radley hasn't said that explicitly, but it's clearly in the back of his mind as well. But Jackson, what does he have to say for himself? There's a guy in there who just, as he says, this is him saying it, just shoots the shit with you when you come in to pay. Ooh, he used bad language. He'd heard that I had previously given some pro bono legal help to a family who owned a barbecue restaurant. They were being sued by pigs. I don't know it doesn't matter. Just the sort of point of, he's an attorney and he helps out around the neighborhood, including just your regular good old fashioned barbecue restaurant people. Well, this attendant said, he said that there was a family in the area where the dad had been caught up in one of the ICE workplace raids, and they're really freaking out. You can imagine, right? The parents were undocumented, while one of the kids is DACA and the other is a U.S. citizen, which is the sort of thing that infuriates Donald Trump, which is why he wants to end birthright citizenship. Anyway, the man asked Jackson if he would be willing to just talk to them and make sure they know their rights and where they can find some help. I said, absolutely. I'm not an immigration lawyer, but they were scared to reach out to anyone. You can understand why. So I said I'd go there and try to just give them the basics. In other words, a good Samaritan, Christian kind of thing. Anyway, later that afternoon, March 4th, Jackson visited the family in their home. It was a little difficult to communicate because everything had to be translated through the 10-year-old kid. He met with them for less than an hour and told them their rights if they were detained by ICE. I said, I'll try to help find them pro bono counsel who specialized in immigration. I'll try to get you somebody who can really give you the immigration lowdown. But for now, here's your basic rights in this country. I'm just telling you what the Constitution says. Well, a couple of days later, on March 6th, I was working from home at around 11:30. He had been listening to the show, and then he got to work about half an hour afterwards. I imagine. It's not really necessarily true, but well. Anyway, March 6th, 2 days later, he's working at home when I got a notice that my VPN had gone down, my virtual private network. He's being good about protecting his online security. So my VPN has gone down. What happened here? Well, I didn't think too much about it. It can cut out from time to time. About 10 minutes later, I got a knock on the door, and you wonder, why is he connecting these two things? Well, two men were outside Jackson's door, dressed in slacks and polos. They were not wearing badges. I first thought they were going to try to sell me something. But as soon as I opened the door, they said, "Are you Clayton Jackson?" I think I shook my head or said, yeah, and then I heard, "We have information that you are obstructing an ongoing immigration investigation." And of course, as you know, because it's immigration, it's terrorism, because it's an invasion, and so therefore you're probably aiding and abetting terrorism. That is not stated here, but that is the context in which we have to read this. Jackson says alarms went off in his head. My first instinct was to want to know what this was about, that it must be a misunderstanding. So I started to tell them about how I've been involved in some pro bono work, and then this voice in my head kicked in and just said, "You need to shut the F up." Now he doesn't. I this time, I don't know. I'm getting squirrely about reading other people's profanity. If it's not a super important point in the story to to use the actual profanity. You can figure out what it is. You need to shut the F up. That's true. Don't say anything. Lawyer taking his own advice here. The officers never identified themselves. They did ask if they could come inside, and I said, absolutely not. I asked for their names and their badge numbers. They said they didn't have to provide that information at this time. Now, he's not being detained, and he's not being formally questioned, so maybe that's even true. I don't know. So I told them I'd be calling my lawyer, and I shut the door behind me. Jackson says his mind started racing. I needed to know who they were, right? You would want to know too. What agency were they with? Then I remembered I have a Ring camera. Maybe I could watch the video of the incident and figure out who they were from that. But guess what? There was no video. Yeah, that's when I learned that why my VPN had gone down. It wasn't the VPN. It was someone had shut off my Wi-Fi. Ooh, that's a little scary. Is he being paranoid? Well, about 15 minutes after the interaction at his front door, Jackson's Wi-Fi was up and running again. So there was about a 30-minute period where my Wi-Fi was down, and it happened to be the period when these officers came to my door, which prevented my Ring camera from recording them, he says. I guess it could be a coincidence, but that's a big coincidence. Jackson actually contacted AT&T to see if he could get some sort of documentation on how and why his Wi-Fi went out. They weren't any help. But guess what he found out later? I'll tell you after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So I was going to use the break to try to find the Trump Truth Social post that I had mentioned in the past segment, and then I realized that was like 20 minutes ago, and I've forgotten, well, which one did I want? I mean, there are so many of them. He goes on and on for hours and at all hours, and I can't remember which one it was. I'm going to have to go back and listen to my own tape later on just to figure out what link to give you. All right. Well, I was in the middle of reading you from Radley Balco's Substack entry here. We're talking about Clay Jackson, the attorney down in the Dallas, Texas area, who was just approached by an attendant at the gas station who asked if he would talk to a guy he knew, an immigrant family who was having immigration problems, i.e. dad had gotten swept up in an ICE workplace raid, and everybody was freaking out. And he agreed to come and tell them, look, I'm not an immigration lawyer, but here are your basic rights when ICE comes calling. And in the meantime, you need to try to find a immigration attorney, and I can help you do that. I can help find you some pro bono legal representation who's actually an expert in immigration law. And then 2 days later, for whatever reason, and however it happened, knock on the door by alleged federal agents who wouldn't identify themselves or what agency they were with, and questioned him about what he had done in helping the neighborhood family, just telling them, look, the Constitution says you have certain rights. That's just a fact. No longer the case, apparently, here in the United States. And not only that, but if you tell people that they have constitutional rights, we're going to come after you. What the effing F is going on here? So anyway, he decides to try and figure out who were these people that came to his house after all. So he goes to his Ring camera and finds, hey, during the period of these guys visiting me, mysteriously, my Ring camera is not working. I had thought that maybe it was just a coincidence that my Wi-Fi went out at the time. I asked AT&T what they know about it. They didn't know anything. But he goes on to say, I have a buddy who's a former federal law enforcement officer and is now a lawyer. And we don't know who the guy is. We don't know what his background is. We don't know if he's, got the story straight or not. But it's his claim that when he gave him a call and asked him if federal agencies have the technological capability to shut down someone's Wi-Fi without them knowing, and if that's something that they would actually do for a case like this. And he says, hell yes. He said they do it all the time when they want to have an informal interview with somebody and they don't want to be recorded. It's interesting. They have better OPSEC than the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of Defense and Department of Homeland Security. Those guys are paying attention to their operational security, these unknown agents. So people I spoke to who have expertise in these matters said, A, it would not be difficult to shut down someone's Wi-Fi, and B, doing so without a court order would be illegal. Oh my. Not that they appear particularly worried about such things. Jackson isn't an immigration attorney, Radley Balco tells us. That's whose Substack we're reading. But he occasionally represents undocumented people in non-immigration matters. He is using his real name, but he asked that I not name his employer or describe the type of law that he practices. And I guess my guess is that if you're trying to track down Clay Jackson in Dallas, Texas, even if you know he's a lawyer, you'll probably get about 16 to 35 hits on that, and you might not be able to narrow it down. Anyway, he loves the profanity. He says, we'll say shoot, because Dallas. I thought, shoot. Now I'm going to have to get my employer involved. I'm going to have to retain my own attorney. And now I have to worry about my clients. If they're investigating me, are they going to start looking into my clients too? Like, you're endangering those people. And if they're looking into Clay Jackson, they're looking into everybody. Maybe they are investigating everybody after all. As he thought about the incident, Jackson couldn't help but put it in the context of the Trump administration's mass deportation efforts, that's what it's all about, as well as its ongoing campaign to intimidate the legal profession. I'm anti-MAGA, and I'm worried about where this country is headed, but I'm pretty low-key, he said. I'm not the type to say, chain myself to a Tesla dealership. This is a very conservative area, but there's a large and growing Latino population. I wanted to do some pro bono work outside of the scope of my day-to-day job, so I agreed to help out the family who owns the barbecue place. And so now that makes it sound like it's the immigrant family that owns the barbecue place, but I'm not certain that that's the case. That might have been his impetus to get into pro bono work in the beginning, and then he also did this other bit. But it wasn't even pro bono legal work that he was doing for this family. It was just a short meeting to tell them what are your rights, and you need to speak to somebody who's an expert in this, and I'll try and find you somebody. But it is legal advice, but it's only the loosest kind of relationship in terms of, there's no... I guess you could say, the legal ethics people would probably say, well, you have established a professional relationship here. Now, it may be the case that you're not billing them, and it may be the case that you never represent them in court or even write so much as a letter on their behalf, but you did give them legal advice. And that could be the entirety of your relationship, but there is one. You should know that. My guess, he goes on to say, is that this was just a couple of officers' dorky attempt to intimidate me, Jackson tells me, but if it happened to me, it's probably happened to other attorneys. So I wanted to reach out to you to get the word out and see how often this is happening, because it needs to stop. And that's the ICE and ICE-related agents, and sometimes maybe people who even aren't agents and are just out there looking to intimidate people under color of law. They are getting rather bold. We have seen some badge-holding agents, although we didn't get a close-up of their badge, smashing in the windows of detainees in their car. and reports from all over the place, basically, of agents overstepping their bounds. And then they might not even be agents, or at least not agents authorized to do what they're doing. That could lead me to another story. Anyway, I've reached out, Radley says, to the law enforcement agencies who are presumably involved in immigration enforcement in Jackson's county, including ICE, the local sheriff's department, and the Texas National Guard. None returned my request for comment. Intimidating lawyers has become a key component of the Trump administration's overall strategy, and this is especially true with respect to mass deportations. Immigrants detained for lacking documentation are more than 10 times more likely to get a favorable outcome if they have an attorney than if they don't. So you want to prevent them from getting one if you can, by any means necessary, apparently. Trump officials are certainly aware of this. During Trump's first term, Attorney General Jeff Sessions decried, quote, dirty immigration lawyers, claiming they were encouraging their clients to make false claims of asylum, providing them with the magic words needed to get relief. There were also multiple incidents of DHS targeting immigration attorneys, advocates, and journalists with criminal investigations, or by flagging their passports for extra scrutiny if they left and re-entered the country. But this time around, they're ratcheting up the pressure. By the way, I just want to go back to the concept of, well, they're dirty immigration lawyers. They do things like provide their clients with magic words needed to get relief. And it's true that if you say certain magic words, that it will open the possibility that the court might grant you political asylum. By the way, what do you think those magic words are? And what's really interesting is how the same concept of magic words, and in fact, maybe even the same effing magic words, are being used by dirty immigration lawyers and filthy immigrants to fool this country and bleed us dry and screw with this justice system and take away our country from us. But at the same time, the same magic words are also being used, and Radley Balco certainly knows this, by police. What are the magic words that will get you political asylum in this country? One of the biggest, most frequently heard claims and most frequently successful claims for getting political asylum is that you are afraid for your life in your country. You are in fear for your life. Does that remind you of any magic word situations with, for instance, respect to police brutality charges? I thought he had a gun. I feared for my life. Well, in that case, whether it's police or whether it's stand your ground people, private citizens saying that I'm invoking the stand your ground, like I was in fear for my life. Oh, well, why didn't you say so? I did. Okay, well, that seems like magic words that should get you off the hook, and it does. Wow. The concept of magic words, not so scary all of a sudden to Jeff Sessions, not so offensive, even though it's the same magic words. But I mean, you're talking about a brown person being afraid for their life. That sucks. Whereas, but I don't care. And a white person, a cop, for God's sake, fear for life. Well, that's something we want to invoke the state power for. Same words, and same words being rejected as valid by some people, for some people, but for others, that's everything. That's all that ever mattered in court. There should be no proceedings beyond that if you said you feared for your life. Interesting, though, that they differentiate from, and that, by the way, when you talk to them about Black Lives Matter movement, well, what do they say to that? Well, all lives matter, they say. Do they? Well, they're saying the same. Here's a life saying the same exact magic words, meaning the same exact thing as that guy. Yeah, but I don't know. Oh, my gosh. Wow. I can't believe they're hypocrites. Yep. Yeah, it happens. Anyway, I should make a note to myself here. All right, the other stories I wanted to bring to your attention. Let's see. The stand your ground thing came up. That was something I wanted to bring up. Okay, and all right, I think that's probably about it. But let me continue on with Radley Balco's piece here. This time around, he says they're ratcheting up the pressure. It's actually getting worse. Last month, Trump issued an executive order claiming, without evidence, that immigration attorneys commonly coach clients to conceal their past or lie about the circumstances when asserting their asylum claims. or if they're trying to get off on a shooting charge as police officers, say the same thing. Conceal your past. Lie about your circumstances, having been fired from 6 other police agencies, say, and then say that you were in fear for your life. And that this practice undermines the integrity of our immigration laws and the legal profession more broadly, to say nothing of the undeniable tragic consequences of the resulting mass illegal immigration. This is the Trump supporter saying this. Before mentioning the names of women allegedly killed by undocumented immigrants, the order directed Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate and seek possible sanctions against attorneys and firms who engage in such behavior, i.e. offer defense, legal defenses to people who have been arrested. There have now been at least 2 incidents in which Customs and Border Patrol agents have detained immigration attorneys at the border and attempted to search their cell phones. One was held for several hours. One of the first prestigious law firms Trump targeted with an executive order was Paul Weiss. And though he appears to have targeted the firm due to its employment of former special counsel Robert Mueller, the firm also led the legal fight against Trump's family separation policy during his first term. After Trump announced an agreement with the firm, it removed immigration-related cases from the pro bono section of its website. In multiple recent interviews, Trump's immigration czar, Tom Homan, has repeatedly threatened Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez with criminal prosecution for handing out Know Your Rights information to our constituents and streaming similar webinars to social media. The administration has barred organizations from conducting Know Your Rights legal orientation programs in federal courthouses. And in a deranged Newsmax interview earlier this month, Trump terrorism advisor Sebastian Gorka, you know him.
That dreadful Hungarian?
The guy, we just spent 20 minutes on him. Well, he, as I told you then, declared that people merely advocating for the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia are advocating for a terrorist and could be charged with federal crimes against aiding and abetting terrorism. There is no credible evidence that Abrego Garcia is a terrorist or has committed any crime. Keep in mind that Trump's DOJ has already opened or promised criminal investigations grounded in equally asinine interpretations of the law. For example, Bondi recently vowed to open criminal investigations into nonprofits and private companies with DEI programs on the theory that those programs violate federal anti-discrimination laws. Trump's unhinged acting U.S. attorney, yes, that's right, acting U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, Insurrection Ed Martin, as he calls him, opened a criminal investigation of nonprofit organizations who have received federal grants related to climate change, on the theory that climate change is a hoax and that therefore accepting those grants was a form of fraud. It's getting that crazy out there. The goal here isn't to get convictions, at least not yet. It's to harass, intimidate, and incapacitate anyone with power, money, or platforms that can be used to thwart his administration's aspiration for authoritarianism. In a separate executive order, for example, Trump vowed to end student loan forgiveness for people who work for nonprofits. He's going to end it for everybody, of course. But who work for nonprofits that engage in activities that have a substantial illegal purpose, including aiding or abetting violations of federal immigration laws. Wow. The chemical and surgical castration or mutilation of children, or the trafficking of children to so-called transgender sanctuary states. What even is that? Engaging in a pattern of aiding and abetting illegal discrimination, DEI. Engaging in a pattern of violating state tort laws, what? Including laws against trespassing, disorderly conduct, public nuisance, vandalism, and obstruction of highways. In other words, coordinating national protest. Not the most important point here, but these are not tort laws, he points out. The clear aim, though, is to make it extremely difficult for nonprofits who advocate for homeless people, trans rights, political protesters, though presumably not of the January 6th variety, and of course, asylum seekers and undocumented immigrants to recruit young talent. Without loan forgiveness, most recent graduates, and law school graduates in particular, can't afford to work for these organizations. Meanwhile, debt forgiveness will remain for those who work for nonprofits that support the president's agenda. Not to mention the $1 billion or so in pro bono legal work that Trump has managed to extort from Paul Weiss and several other big law firms. That's enough money to fund about 9 heritage foundations, the think tank responsible for the Project 2025 blueprint. Others have pointed out that Trump's funding cuts across the federal government, particularly the threats and withholding of funds to colleges and universities, could either shut down legal clinics that provide aid to immigrants, like what Lindsay Halligan used to do when she was in law school, but now she switched sides. I suspect she was always on that side. Or they may persuade law schools to shut those clinics down entirely. Make examples of a few, intimidate the rest into submission. It seems to be working. On social media sites like Blue Sky, journalists have observed that sources in fields currently in Trump's crosshairs are now unwilling to speak on the record. I've noticed this too. For example, one indigent defense office whose attorneys were previously willing to talk to me on the record would only discuss their immigration work with me if I didn't mention the name of the office or of the attorneys. I don't really blame them. The difference between them and, say, the capitulating law firms is that they're still doing the work. In fact, many nonprofit advocacy groups are now self-censoring to avoid attracting the administration's ire, and Trump's more recent threat to revoke Harvard University's nonprofit status has only fueled the panic. Here is one tragic example. Last week, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was ordered by the Department of Justice to remove transgender children and other LGBTQ plus youth from its public-facing materials, even though they're missing, for God's sake, or lose its significant federal funding. At first reported by independent journalist Marissa Cabas and later confirmed by NBC News, leadership at the NCMEC complied, directing staff to erase LGBTQ plus children from its website and publications. Like they're not missing. Now they're missing from the missing children database, for God's sake. Missing twice. The first time I spoke with Clay Jackson, he says, he was reeling. Jackson's a white guy with a well-paying job, centrist politics, and plenty of connections in the legal community. He's a smart guy who clerked for a federal judge, and yet there were multiple points in our conversation where I felt like I needed to reassure him that he had done nothing wrong. He had given some legal advice to people who needed it. That is, and always has been, and always should be, legal. It isn't that Jackson regrets what he did, but the visit from those 2 officers made him feel as if he should. And as if he'd brought the visit from the police upon himself. When I reminded him of this, he replied, "Thanks for saying that. It's something I have to keep reminding myself. Helping people out pro bono is part of my professional obligation as a lawyer. I did nothing wrong." Then he paused for a moment. "But can I just be honest with you? I'm effing scared to be in Texas right now." Not long ago, I'd have thought such a statement to be a little paranoid. I'm not so sure now. As the Immigration Council's Aaron Rachlin Melnick, who we all have been seeing posting quite frequently on Blue Sky, explained in an interview here at The Watch, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has been out-trumping Trump on this issue for years. He has really led the charge, illegally, I would say, but he has really led the charge in using his power as Texas Attorney General to go after migrant rights nonprofits. He's attempted to shut down or strip nonprofit status from multiple organizations that provide direct support, including several faith-based organizations. I thought they were supposed to be exempt, that work along the U.S.-Mexico border. Wrong faith. I see. He attempted to shut down a nonprofit in Houston that supports migrants on the claim that it was violating its 501c3 status by opposing some Texas laws, even while he simultaneously and happily accepted the support of conservative nonprofits that are very clearly electioneering by supporting specific candidates. Paxton has also attempted to use Texas business law to go after these groups. So far, every one of these efforts has been a complete failure. He hasn't found a single judge to rule in favor of any of these issues, but people are nervous because he continues to try. And remember, of course, conservatives were hugely opposed to using New York business law to go after Donald Trump. That was a weaponization of government. But using Texas business law to go after these groups is cool and awesome. Anyway, Trump himself has also expanded his retribution campaign from groups to individuals. His recent executive order to DOJ to open criminal investigations into whistleblowers Chris Krebs, that's what he's doing in the photo up top, and Miles Taylor is perhaps the most chilling example. There's no credible allegation that either committed a crime. Their only transgression if it even is one, was to have criticized Trump publicly, as Taylor did, or to have interrupted Trump's efforts to generate fake evidence that the 2020 election was stolen, as Krebs did. Trump's executive order targeting the firm Sussman Godfrey was direct retaliation for that firm's litigation on behalf of Dominion Voting Systems, a company that was nearly wiped out and whose employees were harassed and threatened because of insane, easily disproven lies spread by Trump and his allies about 2020. None of these efforts will hold up in court, or at least they shouldn't. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that acts we once took for granted as virtuous, routine, and safe, telling the truth, representing those who oppressed by the state, providing legal aid to the powerless, volunteering to work at a polling site, basic journalism, now carry some risk. They now require some courage. Maybe the government won't send you to prison, at least not yet, but it can make your life really difficult, which, by the way, ask the political scientists, what does it mean? It means that if you're waiting for the end of democracy, you're too late. You're already living in an authoritarian society. The nature of government has changed if these things have an element of danger attached to them. They're not supposed to. That's the definition of democracy. It's not supposed to bring the police to your door if you do those things. If it does, you're too late for saving your democracy. Clay Jackson hasn't learned anything more from the two officers who visited him, nor has he heard from whatever agency that employs them. It seems likely that his initial hunch was correct. This incident wasn't the product of a top-down conspiracy to intimidate lawyers. It's more likely that two cops were pissed off that someone had the audacity to help a scared and powerless family. But it also isn't surprising that low-level immigration enforcers would feel empowered to intimidate an attorney, as this administration defies court orders, weaponizes the law for retribution, tramples due process, and equates advocating for immigrants with supporting terrorists. A few months ago, I had a similar conversation with another attorney. This attorney practices post-conviction law. I had called to talk about another matter, but the conversation inevitably turned to Trump. This attorney mentioned that he'd recently had done some work on his home, like on his home, not from his home, and gotten to know one of the contractors, that kind of work. The contractor was undocumented, and he feared he may be deported. In the 20-some years that he'd been in the U.S., this contractor had done well for himself. He owned his own contracting business, his home, and some property. He asked if the attorney could help him transfer the business and title to his home and property to his son, who's a U.S. citizen. The attorney and his wife, who's also a lawyer, agreed to help. As my wife and I started filling out the paperwork, we realized that we might be doing this sort of work for other people over the next few years. So she suggested we bring up one of the old desktops from the basement, so whatever immigration work we were doing would be on a separate computer. The attorney's college-age son had taken an interest in all of this. My son asked if what we were doing was illegal. I told him it was all perfectly legal. Then he asked me a question I really couldn't answer. Why did we feel like we had to take these steps to hide legal work that was perfectly legal? And all I could think to say was that this is the kind of country we live in now. Yeah, good point. And more to the point, that means something. And it means that there's a change in the basic nature of the country you're living in and the government you're living under. And in fact, just the other day, my mom sent me something, which I can send you a link to, actually a NPR Fresh Air interview with a Harvard professor of government. I think was a political scientist, or he's also a law professor. I can't remember which, or both. Sometimes they overlap. But a lengthy discussion that will clarify that pronouncement I just got. I'm not just saying out of nowhere, hey, if these things that are perfectly legal and ordinarily obviously protected by our civil liberties and the rights that we have as citizens in this country are making, if you now have to think twice about exercising them, that means that the basic nature of governance in this country has changed. And if you were waiting for them to hang up the banner like, X days without democracy and start putting up numbers before you thought that had happened, no, you missed it. It's too late. All right, speaking of too late, it's too late to start down another path on other stories that I wanted to share with you as we have reached our time limit. But I did want to say, I wanted to bring up something that I had shared recently on Blue Sky that I was reminded of with the evolution of Republican legal theory, essentially. We've been covering this stuff for so long, even before the show. It occurs to me that, back in the late 80s, early 90s, and through the late 90s, we were dealing with Republican legal theory at that time, but they get more and more bold as the years go on. Back then, the thrill was, the thing that gave them a tingle in their leg was to talk about tort reform. If you're old enough, to remember tort reform, even there was some tort law mentioned earlier today, but tort reform essentially was aimed at jury verdicts, which they felt were out of control. People were suing corporations, essentially, and coming away with gigantic legal settlements. And they wanted tort reform. In case the trial goes the wrong way, you can just reverse the jury's verdict. Okay. It's direct action. It's the most democratic action there is, just people in the community making a decision along with the lawyers and the judges about what to do about these things. But that's kind of where it started. Well, if the jury is wrong, we can reverse it, tort reform. And that sort of then emerged into the next step. Like, it's not enough to be able to reverse a jury's verdict when it's over with. We would rather, what if we didn't even have to stand trial at all? Why the expense and stress of standing trial only to have to wait to reverse the verdict later? How about things like stand your ground laws, which will say, hey, if you used your gun the right way and you are the right color for it, why even bother with trial? To hell with that. Sure, there'll be a preliminary hearing to see whether or not you're entitled to stand your ground protections, but you can handle that, right? It's only one hearing. Well, apparently that got to be too much for people too. Republicans were getting annoyed at having to have hearings. So you know what? What the F? Let's get rid of the entirety of due process and just snatch up the brown people we don't like off the street and ship them out of the country so that we can claim not to have jurisdiction over them anymore, and we can keep them in a supermax prison, and who cares whether it's humane or not, or who cares whether they survive or not, because they're never getting out. First, screw the juries, then, these hearings are too much trouble, or these trials are too much trouble, let's not have those, and then even appearing before a judge. Not too much for us. It's amazing. It only goes in one direction, and it gets worse and worse. They really hate justice, don't they? Well, we don't.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
In fact, the next guy up with the next program is named Justice. Justice Putnam will bring you the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy right here on Netroots Radio coming up next. And guess what? He's got his eye on this stuff too. As the Trump regime continues its assault on the Constitution, he says, the defense of democracy will increasingly depend on governors willing to fight back. Stay tuned. We'll see you tomorrow.